What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episode 8 of The Last of Us, an episode called When We Are in Need, written by Craig Mazin and directed by Ali Abbasi. And spoiler alert for anybody who has not yet seen the episode, go do so, because there's some really juicy moments in this as the show kind of shifted into a different genre. And once again, last spoiler alert, but who doesn't love a good cannibal story, whether you're talking about cannibal classics like Cannibal Holocaust, or I guess hypothetical question or philosophical question, are all zombie shows and or movies at least tangentially, I can't even pronounce that word, are they at least affiliated with the cannibal genre? I guess I always think of cannibals as people eating people as opposed to monsters eating people, but at any rate, I love a good cannibal story, even if it's a proper love story, like Bones and All, starring Timothée Chalamet. It came out last year, which I strongly recommend that everybody go see. But here we are, episode 8, show's almost over. We have one more to go. And from the brief glimpses of what I saw in the teaser, it does appear as if they're going to completely, totally wrap up the story from the first game. And I was wondering if they would end with like a big, massive cliffhanger going into season 2, but we can keep all of our season 2 discussion for later on. Let's focus on this episode. But before I get to my breakdown of this particular story, I do want to address one thing. In reference to a couple of my earlier reviews for this show, some folks have suggested that I'm being too kind or too generous and not being rigorous enough in my criticism. So what I will say is I watched a fascinating video by Eric Kane a couple days ago, who's been doing his own breakdowns of the show every step of the way, and I really like his YouTube channel. And one thing he was saying was that as he's replaying the first Last of Us game, that as much as he likes this show and as much as he likes the photography, the music choices, the writing choices, the cast, etc., every single one of those ingredients he thinks is better in the game. If you like the music in the show, you'll like the music even more in the game. If you like the violence in the show, you'll definitely like the violence even more. But as somebody who has not played the game, I've only watched the cinematics, I just have to take his word for it. So I guess the good news is, if you love this show, and I do really enjoy this show, the good news is there's an even better experience to be had out there if you want to dust off your old PlayStation and play The Last of Us, or The Last of Us 2 before Season 2 rolls around. But as much as I enjoyed tonight's episode, I actually do have one or two nitpicky grievances, so hopefully that'll help shield me from any further accusations of being too kind or too generous in my praise of this show. So first and foremost, let's talk about how the original Joel from the game, actor Troy Baker, he actually appears in this episode as James, and I kept wondering if they were going to do like an inside joke where they would allow him to speak in the voice of Joel, because he speaks in a very specific, gruff way in the game.
But you're going to mark it on the map, and it better be the same exact spot your buddy points to. Mark it.
And if I hadn't known in advance that Troy Baker was the original Joel, I probably would have been totally oblivious to the fact that the genuine article is there in this episode. But speaking of casting, I really enjoyed seeing Scott Shepherd in here. And I think the only other thing I've ever seen him in was The Young Pope, where he was absolutely incredible as the character who is Jude Law's brother in the first season of that show. But here he plays David, the shepherd of his flock and the leader of the cannibals. And I thought on the whole that he did a really good job. But quick question for people out there who were not aware that these were cannibals prior to the big reveal with that ear underneath the tray. I mean, there have been some breadcrumbs and hints and that sort of thing, but I knew ahead of time this was going to be the cannibal episode. But at what point did people realize that David was not acting in good faith? I suspect it's that moment where he and Ellie are talking, and they're talking about how he used to be a math teacher and how he became a believer, etc., and so forth. And then he has this really creepy moment where he says, everything happens for a reason. And then he looks over her shoulder and says, James, lower the gun. And that unfolded much like it did in the game. But I thought his delivery there was a great clue that, oh my God, like, this guy's a total fucking maniac. Watch out. But let me slow down and take this step by step. The episode opens with a little girl crying. We learn that her father is dead, but that the ground is too cold for her father to be buried, but that he'll be buried in the spring. Once again, I knew this was the cannibal episode, so right away I knew that guy's going to be dinner. But as we learn later on, the person who has died was one of the people that fought Joel back in episode 6, or at the end of episode 6, who stabbed Joel. And going back to how the show always does a good job of showing different conflicts from different perspectives, from the point of view of these people, many of whom do not know that they are cannibals, I'm sure they're thinking, oh my God, like, who is this fucking psycho who killed one of our own? And they are feeling some justifiable cravings for revenge. But of course, from Ellie and Joel's perspective, they looked like raiders or marauders or total fucking psychopaths, and they were well within their rights to take that dude out. But speaking of Ellie and Joel, we see how she is totally out of food. I mean, she's down to like 2 mouthfuls left, and she's debating like how much she should eat in order to go hunting, and she leaves just a little mouthful, a little morsel on his shirt. And we see that his wound is still oozing, it's still gross, super infected. But here comes my first criticism of this episode for everybody who thinks I'm being too generous. But the scene of Ellie hunting was done better in the game, where we see that with a bow and arrow, she is now fucking lethal, whether she's taking out rabbits or taking out deer. And here we see her hunting with a rifle, and sometimes she's holding it correctly and sometimes she's not. For people who don't know, whether you're using a shotgun or a rifle, you want to put the butt of the weapon right up against your shoulder. Admittedly, that is more challenging if you are a small person and you're holding a rifle that's not designed for you, or you're wearing a big bulky jacket. I've definitely gone quail hunting where I've tried to raise my shotgun and it gets caught when you're trying to get it up there. So I get why in some scenes Bella Ramsey was holding it under, but if you fire while the butt of the rifle is under your arm, well, you're probably not gonna hit shit. You might not hit shit even if you aim correctly, but during the scene where she takes out the deer, she did actually get the butt up against her shoulder. And I know a recurring criticism of this show is that the character of Joel has essentially been nerfed. That in the game, he's just a whirlwind of death, just hell on wheels, killing hundreds, if not thousands of individuals from start to finish. But obviously the game is a very different experience where it makes total sense to have just Joel going on a murderous rampage. But I would say that in this episode, we see that Ellie's been nerfed a little bit as well, because when Ellie first meets David and James in the game, she is very convincing holding that bow saying, look, do as I say or you're going to get an arrow right between the eyes. And you believe it as you're watching it. Whereas here she seems a little bit more out of her element, a little more nervous, a little more unsure of herself with the rifle. But Ellie does some shrewd bartering and offers half the deer in exchange for some medicine that can help with Joel's infection. And for the time being, it looks like David is acting in good faith. He talks about his experiences in the quarantine zone in Pittsburgh and how his group moved from place to place and was always being attacked by outsiders, and how they eventually ended up here, and that he feels this big responsibility looking after them, and that the winter has been brutal. It's been long, nothing's growing, game has been scarce, but that he feels this responsibility to protect the women and children that are part of his flock. But one more nitpicky grievance in the game, there's a little clicker battle with David and Ellie having to defend themselves, which was removed from the show because it didn't really contribute anything to the story. But I know a lot of people have been complaining about the lack of monsters in this show, and I really hope that the final episode will not hold back on that front. In any case, Ellie does get the medicine, runs back to Joel, and she doesn't really know what to do with the syringe, so she just shoves the syringe right into his wound. I was like, oh! As I was watching that, but it works. The following day, it's oozing a little less. She gives him the medicine again, and as we will later see, Joel's going to be back on his feet in the very near future, but getting back to the resort where all these cannibals live, or the people who, do not know that they're cannibals, there was this one really great ominous scene where the people in the kitchen are brought a bunch of chunks of meat, and she just asks, what is it? And the guy says, venison. At any rate, his poker face is not super convincing. I was like, yeah, this kitchen is serving people on a regular basis. And as we see at the end of the episode, they have a storage locker for all the meat. They got the dead horse in there, but they also got 3 people hanging from the ceiling. Super gross. But we continue to see signs of just how strange David is, like when he's talking to his community about how Joel's going to be brought to justice, and this one girl starts demanding death, and David slaps her. David seems a little inconsistent with, I guess, his guidance or his ideas for the community, because on one hand, he's definitely all about bringing people to justice, but on the other hand, he doesn't seem to like it when people take justice into their own hands. However, it's totally fine when he does. Perfect example is when James is suggesting that Ellie just be left to starve, and that perhaps her starving would just be part of God's plan, because if they bring her back to their camp, it's just going to be another mouth to feed. And David gives him this look like any second David's just going to cut him down then and there. So anyway, like a lot of fanatical leaders, David's got a lot of very strange, interesting contradictions within him. But when Ellie sees that the flock is coming to get her, she leaves Joel the knife and tells him, look, if anybody but me comes down here, fucking kill them. And she tries riding off on her horse in dramatic fashion. And it was a pretty badass scene as she's riding away and blasting over her shoulder. But James follows very carefully, takes the horse down, and she takes a really, really bad fall. And in a move that he will come to regret, David decides to leave a couple people behind to look for Joel, while the horse and Ellie are taken back to camp. And Ellie's placed on a cage. The horse is placed in a basically, I guess, like a barn for the frozen meat. But we see how back in the town, as these people are looking for Joel starts coming to. And the first sign that Joel's going to be back on his feet, we see the bloody mat on the ground, and he's gone. And in one of the sickest scenes all season, when Joel takes this dude out with a knife, the guy's kind of like looking at him with this murderous intensity. Basically, like his face is turning into like a rictus before he's even dead. In any case, Joel continues to take people out one at a time, leading to an interrogation scene where I was terrified that it would be considered too hardcore or too vicious to be included in the show. But thankfully, it got included in the show almost word for word, shot for shot. And this is one of those moments where we see just how vicious Joel can be, where he puts a knife down to a guy's knee and threatens to rip his entire knee off unless he points on the map where they are and where Ellie's been taken. And he says, and if your friend doesn't give me the exact same answer, well, anyway, it's not going to be good. And when he ends up killing the guy, the other guy against the wall is like fuck you, like I'm not going to tell you shit. And Joel just says, don't worry, I believe him. And that's one of those lines. That's why you hire someone as good as Pedro Pascal to play a part like this, because he sells it. When he says, I believe him, he says it was such murderous intensity. And for me, it was just a relief to see that the show is not going to tap the brakes when it comes to one of the more vicious, notorious scenes in the game. And from this point on, the sick and twisted scenes just start piling up, just growing with compound interest. We see Ellie in her cage looking over at this butchering table, and she sees an ear underneath, and she knows exactly what's going on. And David comes in, sees that she's seen the ear, and is like, well, for what it's worth, this actually is deer meat. And that's when they have a very strange kind of heart-to-heart, honest conversation where he seems to veer back and forth between wanting to be some sort of like strange predatory lover with a girl who's like 1/5 his age, or being like a kind of a commanding father presence who's going to teach her everything that he knows. But he keeps saying how he wants an equal and that somebody will help lead his flock. But on the other hand, he's rubbing her hand in a very sick and predatory fashion. But just like in the game, she breaks his finger, makes a grab for the keys. She gets her face smashed as a result. And when David comes back with James, goddamn, like it really felt like for a second there they were going to chop her up like some scene out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But that's when she announces, just like in the game, that she is infected, and because she's already bitten David's hand, he is now infected as well. And we see James completely freaking out, justifiably so. Right before he gets a giant cleaver right to the neck, David opens fire. All hell breaks loose. It's total pandemonium. Leads to this big dramatic face-off in a burning building with David versus Ellie. People get stabbed. People get chopped up. And David looks like he's on the verge of just having like a really vicious, horrible rape scene right before Ellie gets the cleaver into him and proceeds to just chop and chop and chop and chop. And when she reunites with Joel outside, for a few seconds there, I got genuine chills and goosebumps just with the thrill and the joy of them being reunited. Do not fuck with these two people. I don't know how many people they have killed in the last episode, but quite a few. And I just can't wait to see what adventures that the show has in store for them next episode. I hope that the season ends in a very satisfying fashion. The first game does end in very satisfying fashion. The second game is a wildly controversial game. And we'll probably get to all that in a few years' time when season 2 of this show finally gets to us. But for now, let's just enjoy the fact that this show is managing to deliver one really solid episode after another. Whether or not you love the episodes or just really like them, either way, the show's fantastic. And at some point between season 1 and season 2, I'm just going to break down. I have to buy a goddamn PlayStation 5 and play both these games. I've been enjoying some of the games I've been playing on the Xbox recently. I played Darkest Dungeon, which was just an absolute masterpiece. And right now I'm playing Blasphemous, but at a certain point, just as a way of scratching my Last of Us itch, I will do the deep dive on these two games because it seems like they're just too good to be ignored. But before I wrap things up, I do need to bring you a public service announcement because Manscaped, the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel, they now have beard products and now have a brand new nose and ear hair trimmer. If you haven't already heard, the leaders in below-the-waist grooming are traveling north of your South Pole with their revolutionary Beard Hedger Pro Kit. Plus, they've now launched the brand new Weed Whacker 2.0, which confirms they have all the best tools for your hygiene toolbox. Time for you to upgrade your toolbox by going to manscaped.com and using our discount code WRONGREEL in all caps for 20% off plus free shipping. I'll leave a link down in the description below, but the Beard Hedger Pro Kit is the ultimate package that makes it easier than ever to craft your signature look. It all starts with the Beard Hedger. This thing is an elite beard trimmer. The Beard Hedger is tough on hair but smooth on your face, leading to single stroke efficiency that brings satisfaction one stroke at a time. And with a nice beard, your face is perfectly groomed, right? Wrong. You need to keep an eye out for those tough-to-trim ears and nose hairs. The brand new Weed Whacker 2.0 offers improved blades and skin-safe technology with a no-tugging guarantee. It's never been so painless to mind your manholes. I think it's absolutely hilarious that the official copy for Manscaped is using the phrase manholes. But I didn't come up with it, but I'm more than happy to leave that very lurid image in your mind. I imagine just about every member of the cast of The Last of Us could use all these products. But that's all I have for this week. If you liked the video, please remember to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, like the video, and hunt me down on Twitter at Geeking Out. But I hope everyone has an amazing week, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.